Are you wanting me? Do I have anything to do with this? You go right ahead. You counting? Hello, this is Ann Franklin. We are working with the Board of Education special called meeting for a work session. Our Peggy Buchanan, our representative from the Owen District, is joining us virtually. At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the agenda as written.
Thank you. Could I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor? I have to call your name. Wait just a minute. Pat Bryant?
Aye.
Amy Churchill?
Aye.
Amanda Simpkins?
Aye.
Cindy McMahon?
Aye.
Peggy Buchanan?
Aye.
Franklin? Aye. This evening, I would like to let you know that as we get started, you may have noticed that our INCA representative, Max Queen, is not joining us, but he's joining us via Zoom.
At this evening. At this evening's meeting.
At this evening's meeting. He will be listening in and participating in tonight's board virtually. Mr. Queen would have much preferred to be here in person tonight. However, due to some complications he is experiencing as he personally deals with this COVID-19 diagnosis, he regretfully must participate virtually. We're glad that he can join us and continue to pray for his speedy recovery. At this time, I would call Suzanne Swanger to the podium, and we're going to review our first semester information and data.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, board members, Dr. Baldwin. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share some first semester highlights with you all. I'd like to thank staff for collaborating and working on this presentation for you. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Reed, Ms. Robinson, and Mr. Airwood are here as well, so thank you to them. Each year, we analyze semester results, and we use that data to drive decision making. This year, it is especially important because of the impact of COVID on our staff and our students. Today, you will hear from Student Services, Testing and Accountability, and Curriculum. You will see recent panorama data, which represents the voice of our students. You will also see academic and attendance performance. When I look at all of these data points, it clearly shows in-person instruction matters. I don't think anyone disagrees with that statement. The levels of achievement are strongly correlated to student interaction with their teachers, engagement with course content. We know that student attendance can be challenging during remote instruction. Students may be attending as many as 6 courses or classes per day. Let's start with looking at fall semester. If you were like me, August was a long, long time ago. And we've had a few schedule changes since then. So here's a quick breakdown. You will see divided in K-8 and 9 through 13, you will see the dates of the plans that we were under, from onboarding Plan B beyond, to Plan C, to Plan B, back to Plan C as we started semester 2. Today is the 106th day of school. Our state law in North Carolina mandates that we have at least 1,025 hours in our school year, and we always exceed that number. It's very important to us to have as much instructional time as we can. Because students have had to access remote instruction, the calendar may not be extended for the weather days as we have had to do in past years. Currently, our final day of school is June 1st, bearing we have no more changes. The current calendar law requires for opportunities of remote learning. In August, when we opened our doors, 40% of our families chose remote learning only options for their children. When we return to Plan B, we expect that number to be about 30%. However, we will have to wait and see what family decisions are made at that time. We are starting to get the 2021-22 calendar planning underway very soon. So you see, fall semester has been quite busy with schedule changes. Next, you're going to hear from Mr. Thompson. You will notice our students are telling us how challenging remote learning can be. They miss their friends. They miss their teachers. My deepest and most sincere appreciation for our teachers, our administrators, and our staff who have worked tirelessly under whatever plan we were under, whether it be C, B, B and beyond. They have all worked very, very hard, making sure that our students had the very best. And we have had excellent work happening in our classrooms and our school buildings. However, we have had learning interruptions, so there's still much work to do. When you review attendance data, I will remind you that it is difficult to require all students to attend class and engage completely while they are remote. We know there are numerous challenges, and you're going to hear some of those today. Buncombe County Schools have kept our expectations high. We also have interventions and support for students who have been struggling or will struggle. Just as we do every semester, we always support our students who are challenged in COVID and in regular times as well. We know that attending class helps make students available to the instruction and engaged with the instruction. So we appreciate the hard work of our families and caretakers, learning hubs that are created and pods in our communities. We know that lots of folk in our community are helping our kids during this time period. Our academic results mirror what we are hearing regionally and nationally. We know that our most successful students, typically those A students, are not as successful as they have been in past years. We also know that our struggling students continue to experience difficulties during this pandemic. Again, we know that in-person instruction matters, and we all look forward to the day that we can return to our classrooms. So let's dig into the data, and Mr. Thompson will join us now.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I don't know if there's an echo in this room, and that combined with the mask makes it very hard for me to understand what's being said. So is it okay for us to ask people to take their masks off if they're distanced from each other at the podium?
Certainly.
That would help me a whole lot. Thank you.
We'll be glad to. Thank you.
You echo also.
Afternoon, members of the board. I do want to share with you some of our student services data. I think around the Panorama. Many of you will recall that Panorama is our social emotional learning screener. So this screener is what we use it for, is to really get an idea of what our students are trying to tell us. So I'd say there's three different ways of looking at data. What do the numbers say? What do we notice about those numbers? What about those numbers makes us wonder? What is it that makes us wonder about? What questions do we have? And then finally, what are the students trying to tell us by that data? What are they trying to tell us by their responses? So when we look at the survey this year, we had about a 64% response rate. I think given the situation that we were in with remote and hybrid, that's probably a pretty good response. On a typical year, it's really more about a 90% response when we're in person. So we really have to look at this data as student perception data only. We do not have the staff responses this year. But we had about 22 schools with over an 80% response rate, and about 13 more that had a 60 to 79% response rate. So I feel good, comfortable looking at the data, particularly when we look at those schools individually. When we also go to that data now, go to the next slide. Let's look at 3 through 5. It's broken out in 3 through 5 and then 6 through 13. What we do see is really pointing out some strengths here is that we see our emotion regulation and self-management, which are two areas which we really worked hard with social emotional learning instruction over the last several years. We really worked hard to teach students how to have a skill that when they get upset, they can calm themselves or they can manage themselves to be able to do productive work. So when you look at those percentages, it is the number of students who responded favorably, that they had emotion regulation skills, that they had self-management skills, that the academic needs, they were doing okay academically, it's a little bit lower there. What I really want to point out the attention to is both the student engagement data and the learning model, and the correlation between the student engagement, which was 65% responding favorably, and the learning model, which was down to 55. So we ask really specific questions. In addition to the data, we ask some open-ended questions to get more of a student voice. What are they saying? What are they saying to us? First, I will note, and I will note to the teachers that overwhelmingly, the students said very positive things about their teachers' efforts to teach, to respond to their needs, and to be responsive when they ask questions. Overwhelmingly, that was one of the most frequent responses that we saw in the open-ended questions. But we asked also a question, how much effort are you putting into your schoolwork around engagement? How much effort are you putting in? And about 80-something% of those students said, we are trying very hard. We're putting forth a lot of effort into the work. But then the next question was, how difficult is it for you to try hard? And overwhelmingly, they also said it is very hard to try hard all the time in a pandemic. It is very hard for us to sustain our attention to multiple Zoom classes over the time and really get the same benefit from our instruction. Overwhelmingly, that was what our students were telling us. We also asked them to give us some indication is if they had missed instruction online or in person, what were some of the reasons why they missed? So some of the reasons that they listed themselves were family sickness, their own sickness, that their family was doing something that they needed to do with them and they could not be in class. Some said that they really didn't, in different words, but that they really were having trouble sustaining and doing that many classes in a day. So it's sustaining their effort and persisting with it. Some of them, our older students, had work commitments that they were working to help support their families. What you also know is that starting around middle school to high school, we see many of those students caring for younger siblings during the day while parents work. It was some of the responses that they gave. So when we look at attendance data, you can remember some of those reasons why those existed. Let's look at our high school data. Our high school data looks very similar around self-management and emotion regulation and academic needs. When we look at the engagement rate of our students grades 6 through 13, the student engagement goes down to 50% responding favorably, and the learning model at 43%. What I think we're seeing here, when we looked at what do we wonder about and what other information do we have to put with this, is that we see that our students really are they have not yet really become independent learners here. They've really not become independent in being able to engage and do that over time. We also ask questions in 6 through 12 around cultural awareness and action. Those questions were asking, are we inclusive and culturally responsive in our teaching practices? And while we see that is lower than we want it to be, we are actively involved in our North Carolina SEL, social emotional learning and equity planning, learning about developing that equity plan, learning about culturally responsive teaching, both and culturally responsive leadership. As we go across the next few months, we will be implementing some strategies to address that area. So we knew that was not going to be our strong area, but we wanted some baseline data from which we could work. Next, we can look at some community data. This is data from our school-based mental health providers. The larger line on this graph is the number of students who are receiving school-based therapy by the individual providers. So you see Access Family Services, MAHEC, RHA, and a caring alternative. And our caring alternative numbers are small because that is our day treatment. Okay, so we only have a limited number of students in there. So we have seen some decrease in the number of students who are actually taking advantage of our behavioral health services, primarily because those services are being offered telehealth. So additionally to accessing their instruction, we're asking them to access their treatment via telehealth. And sometimes that telehealth, that therapy cannot occur in the most secure setting for them at home. So there's some reluctance for them to participate. So there's some reluctance for them to be there and open and honest with that. So we've seen some decreases there. But the shorter line is how many suicide-specific evaluations that they have done on the students that they work with. So while it looks fairly low, when you look across, we've got about 50 that they've done, 50 students, and they put faces on those students. That's a pretty significant number as we look at those suicide-specific assessments just by our providers. That doesn't even take into account what the screening and upfront work is already done by our school counselors before they review those. I shared some of this data with you earlier, but this was some updates that I wanted to share with you. Next, I'm just going to show you this. I'm not going to read this to you. Most of you have seen this. This is our remote attendance policy before we look at attendance data. Wanted to remind you that the first two things are both and, being in view on the camera and completing work, or there's an option that schools have with the approval of the administrator that they can use another option. They can schedule time to meet with a teacher individually. They can reach out by phone or by individual Zoom meeting or by breakout rooms, and they can do some individual kinds of things with the teacher and complete an assignment and submit it, and that will also be counted as present off-site. But they are still counted as present in our data. So let's look at the data. This is our attendance first semester. It goes into a little bit of second semester, but it's pretty close to just first semester data. But I first looked at our daily attendance rate, which we get every year, for month 2 and month 4 as kind of samples during the first semester. In month 2, our daily attendance rate was 93.13%, and month 4 was down a little bit, but not significantly, at 92.17. Where we typically are, I have to go back to 2018-19 to have a reference for that. So when I look at 2018-19, our daily attendance rate was somewhere between 95 and 96%. So while we see some lower attendance rates here, it looks lower than what you may see on the data below, simply because the students who are missing more than the 10 days don't miss all on the same days. So you see the daily attendance rate will look a little bit higher, okay? When I look at attendance by grade grouping, however, we get a little bit more specific. K4 is 97.73%. I did 5-8 so we can encompass intermediate schools there, and that went down to 80.96%. And at high school, it went back up a little bit to 94.29%. So we looked at, what did we wonder about this? Remember I said we look at what did we wonder? What did we wonder about this? So here's our wonders. When we look at this data, we wonder what the impact of the developmental age of 5th through 8th graders has to do with this. Where are they developmentally? Many of them are just at that point where they are able to stay home alone. They're independent enough to stay home alone, so they really, they have to take the responsibility to get themselves to those teaching sessions. They have to get their work completed, to get it submitted, and they have yet, again, not developed. They've developed independence in some areas, but they've not really developed that independence to know how to be independent learners. The absences below, I look at 10 days and 20 days, because when we consider what chronic absenteeism is, the state and nationally, more than 10% of the days, if you miss more than 10% of the days of school, then you're considered chronically absent. So that's somewhere between 10 and 20 days for us, well, 19 to be exact. So when we look at the indicator of greater than 10 days, what we see on that is that about 24% of our 24.7% of our elementary students have missed more than 10 days, which is pretty significant. When we look at intermediate, it goes up to 33.6%. And when we look at middle school, it's 38.5%. I don't know if you remember middle school or not, but middle school is one of those really stormy times. Everything is difficult. Yeah, everything is difficult, right? Both raising them and being one. Everything is difficult. So when we look at that, we know that the developmental age has a lot to do with what they're doing. I also need to say something about where we are with truancy in the courts. Truancy filing has been very minimal this year, primarily because of the pandemic. We have really looked at our absences as more of an engagement issue. How do we increase our engagement rather than filing truancy? And the court is looking at it the same way. However, the court is interested in making it better for us. We've had numerous conversations with the ADA, who covers the truancy cases. He is very interested in talking with us and with the principals to really brainstorm what can the court do? What can the court put into a court order for the parents that will help us get these students back in school and be productive? So we're really working with the ADA to try to get that opportunity for ADA principals, social workers to have that conversation together about how we can work better together with the courts to increase those chronic absences that are out there. I've also had conversations with Health and Human Services because it is considered sometimes school neglect on health on HHS side, but they will only accept those cases if you file truancy first, and we've not done that much. What they have agreed to do, however, is if we have done all that we can do, and we refer to them and make a report to them, they can take that on as a prevention case, and they can try to directly call the parents to see if there's anything they can do around the supports that they may need to get their students back in school. So we really have kind of multiple layers of intervention. We have, as a student services, our counselors, our social workers have done many things. I want you to know they've done many things, and I'm very proud of what they've done to reach out to families to engage them. Our counselors have provided large group, small group, individual, social emotional skills instruction. They've done small and individual group counseling. They've developed Google Classrooms that are just for counseling with multiple counseling resources available in them. Many of them have created, some of you have been in our elementary schools and seen turnaround rooms where if students get upset, they can go do that. They've created virtual calm down rooms where they can go, if they're feeling upset, if they're feeling stressed, they can go and get tools to help them be able to feel calmer and get back engaged in academics. Social workers have done hundreds of home visits. Our Family Resource Center is sending about 600 boxes of food per week to families who are food insecure. These are just some examples of the many things. And when they deliver food, it's not just about what the basic needs are. It's checking in on those social emotional needs, checking in on their engagement with academics. So multiple things get done in those home visits. So those continue to happen every day. I want to share with you just a few things from our Naviance platform, which is, thanks to the board several years ago, asked us to have a platform where we could do four-year college planning, get data around how our students are progressing toward college and career. So we have engaged a platform called Naviance, and it's a very powerful tool. I can only begin to share a few things with you from that I think are pretty significant. First, I will call your attention to some FAFSA data. This was as of 1/27. When I look at the FAFSA data, we're the second, that's that first yellow line in the middle of all that red. That means that we are about average with where we were this time last year with FAFSA completion. However, I want you to know that next week, on February 11th, Suzanne Govenas and the high school counselors have scheduled a district-wide FAFSA completion night. And this information is going out to parents, it's going out to students. It's been in the Naviance platform, and we are looking forward to that rate going way up. You know that you can remember that the FAFSA completion rate is one of the things that is part of Future Ready NC that districts are being measured around. So we're excited that we have a plan for increasing that participation rate, and our counselors have worked very, very hard on that. And last but not least, we have some college application data that you can see. As you can see, about 624 students have at least one active application in Naviance. And of those, at this point, 597, so almost all of them have submitted at least one of those applications to their colleges. Some have already been accepted. You can see below there the universities that they are applying to. Most of them are our North Carolina University System colleges and universities. And then you can see the 2-year versus 4-year, the public versus private. And again, you know, one thing that we did notice here is that our seniors have an average of 6 applications to 6 different schools, which I think is really high. So, they're very interested in moving forward. So we have not, in the middle of the pandemic, forgotten our college and career readiness. We are actively engaged in doing that. So thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Thompson?
I did have a question, and I don't know. I am confused on the remote attendance policy on the and. Was there reasoning behind that?
So and one of our curriculum people may need to help me out here, but as I understand it, those first 2 are there's an and between them, is that they attend the Zoom session and they complete an assignment. And then you could read the next one as an or between 2 and 3. Or if there are circumstances that can be considered that would keep those things from happening, that with the administrator's approval, that you can look at those circumstances and say, we can make a decision for this student, that we can arrange for alternative times to make contact with the teacher, make sure that they understand what they're doing, and turn in an assignment, and that will also count as a present offsite.
So if they're going to all of their Zooms, they're attending class, like they're going, like just if they were going in person, even if they sit there and they don't do their work all day, we're counting them present if they're in the building, but when they're doing it virtually, if they're in their classes, we're putting part of their attendance requirement based on their work output. That's what I'm trying to understand.
That's true. That is true. This is actually from our state policy, but
Oh, that's a
Ms.
state,
Reed, you may
it's
wanna
from
do
the state? Okay.
What we're trying to address as well is just the student that logs in and walks away.
Right.
So
No, I like the first part of it, absolutely.
assignment, it's really not like a worksheet or something like, it could be something as simple, give me a thumbs up that
Right,
you're
a
with me
response.
or
Okay,
respond.
okay.
That would count as what we call a work product.
I got it.
Okay.
So we wanted at least some engagement to know that they're there.
Yeah.
Whereas in a classroom, typically what you would do as a teacher, you'd go around,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, it could be things like put something in the chat,
Okay,
answer and response.
okay.
Yeah. So it's
Got
a
it.
work product of some kind.
I have a question about the attendance. Do you know how this year's attendance compares to last school year's attendance?
We do know that it's lower. I could not tell you offhand what the comparison rates are, but we do know that that first of all, the daily attendance rate was much higher last year. But we did not, it's not really, it's not.
13th, the governor closing us down, and then the state asked
Yeah.
us to collect attendance after that.
Yeah, so, and it's
That
really,
makes sense,
the attendance data is really hard to make sense out of when you try to look from year to year right now.
Okay.
So we do know where we are now, and that was a snapshot to kind of show us where we are as of first semester.
Okay. And I guess we could then compare first semester and second semester once we have that data. at the, closer to the end of the year then.
You're right,
We'll
we're
have
not
that
far
in.
enough into the second semester to see yet, but
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
it could be.
Thanks.
Any other question?
I just have one on staying on the attendance. How is that information and that data entered and then collected? Because it would seem to me, especially with, and I thought this was where you were going with the first part, the and, that would be very subjective in some ways. What one teacher considers you're participating and doing some work, another teacher may not. And I wonder if there's a lot of subjectivity there. Those numbers are really high to me. And the context of how those numbers are gathered and entered, I think, is important to really understand the level that those numbers represent. So if somebody could help with that a little bit, that would maybe.
I would say we had the same, and we understand there is a little subjectivity to the attendance. I would just, say we're collecting it the best way we can, offering that grace, because of those special circumstances that Mr. Thompson talked about with high school students having to watch younger siblings. And so we're trying to be as flexible as we can.
But how is the collection occurring? Is that teacher doing it at each class, or at the end of the day, are they going back weekly? What are they doing?
In 9 through 13, it's by period. So each teacher would do for their class.
Right.
In grades K through 8, we do it once a day, because we have daily attendance in those grades.
The numbers that you're seeing here, though, has been corrected to reflect daily attendance. and not
So
period
we
attendance.
don't have people being counted twice.
It's non-duplicated. It has been corrected to show daily attendance here. So that's what you see.
So for
That's the
K
numbers.
through 8, is that just the morning meeting? Like, as far as K through 8 goes, how they have to attend every Zoom?
So the teacher looks at the collective participation over the length of the day. So it's not necessarily just showing up to a morning meeting, but it's really looking at the day as
Right.
a whole.
Got it.
I will also say that teachers have shown a lot of grace with extending time periods for work to be turned in.
Right.
So for instance, even though it's due on Wednesday, that student may be able to turn in assignments Friday and it still count towards the attendance for
They
that
have-
day.
Right. It is a range of days to be able to reflect that
I
attendance.
think we all agree it's not as black and white as a student coming into the building and being able to see the whites of their eyeballs in front of you with attendance. It's been complex, and there is going to be a level of subjectivity there.
The information that Ms. Wonger and the curriculum department has put out around attendance is to allow grace and flexibility when you look at attendance data and recording attendance data. So I think that's also probably what you see here.
Well, it's got to be challenging on an educator as well. That classroom teacher, especially if you're doing it one time a day, you've got a lot on your plate, and I think we all appreciate that. And so, what I'm trying to do in my own mind is gauge how much weight do I put on. It's pretty clear for me in past years how I could evaluate those numbers based upon kids in the building each day, and if they came in at the end of first period versus after lunch, and those types of things. So that's kind of where I'm struggling with
I
it.
think the message that I see here when I look at how do I interpret this data is that there is some interpretation of attendance here. What it shows us clearly is that for our students who are in that period of development, that during this pandemic, school is hard for them. Overall, school in a remote setting, it's hard for them to engage and be present all the time. And if I'm looking at one thing that the data tells me and what the students are saying by their behavior, this is difficult for them.
And I think I appreciated that anecdotally, and I think this presents that to me with some data,
I think
some
it
statistics.
paints
So I
that picture
appreciate
around
that.
their
I appreciate that short
Right.
explanation there.
I think their attendance is reflective of where they are emotionally and where they are developmentally and where they are in their ability to be able to sustain their efforts. You got the question? Thank you.
Thank you.
So Mr. Thompson presented the SEL information, and I think what goes hand in hand with the SEL information is the academic, because you cannot really separate the two. So I think it's important to understand when you all right. There we go. Okay, so the academic piece does go hand in hand with the information we just received. So really, we're trying to get a picture of how our learning model has impacted our academics. And one of the ways that we have that we can do that in a very objective way is by looking at our proficiency on our exams that we have for our high schools with the EOCs. And you can see we offer EOC exams in biology, English 2, Math 1, and Math 3. I will caution that most students take Math 1 in the spring, so a year-to-year comparison is not really valid until after spring. Okay, for the other courses, it's comparable because you have similar populations taking it from one year to the next and similar numbers. You know, again, most of our high school students take foundations of Math 1, and of course our middle schools, which is approximately about a third of our 8th graders, will take a year-long Math 1 course. Okay, so there you see that. Now, one of the things that I think is just absolutely remarkable is that we were able to bring in 95+% of our students to take their final exams, these EOCs. And that 95% number is really critical because that's what the federal government mandates, that we have 95% of our students testing. We administered 2,554 EOC exams from December 15th to the present. That's actually a couple of more because students are coming in even now to finish up their exams. So we're still getting those students in. You know, and that represents the number of tests, not the number of students. I just want to make that clear. Some students could count for 2 or 3 of those tests, okay? EOCs, also another incentive they have for coming in is that EOCs in Buncombe County count as 25% of the final grade. And we held to that model. Now, CTEs, we also tested. Now, that doesn't come under my realm. That's Mr. Baldwin handles that. But we tested 2,831 CTE exams. So in total, I guess the picture I want to paint is we were able to bring in students to take approximately 5,400 exams and do it safely. And from December 15th until the 18th, primarily most of our exams occurred in that week. Okay. So just to look and to see how our students are performing, let's look at each of those 4 EOCs that we have. And again, you'll see that you have the 2019 average 100% conversion that the state supplies us. The students take the exam and the state gives us a 100-point conversion for each student to put as 25% of their final grade. And you also have the number of students that we tested in the fall of last year, 2019, to the fall of this year, 2020. Okay, so you can see the numbers are very comparable. We look at 2 things. We're looking at the grade that we see, and I counted the number of students that made an A, B, C, D, F on the exam, and then we also look at the proficiency. Okay, how many students scored at that level 3 or better, level 3, 4, or 5. You can see that on the grades, you know, the number of percent of students making an F is fairly constant or fairly close. But where we see the difference is the number of students making an A. So you can see that the impact is to all of our students. It's not just a certain segment of our students that are being impacted. So some of our traditionally high-achieving students are also being impacted by our model that we're using. So when you look at the proficiency, you can see that in the fall of last year, we had about 60% of our students scored at a level 3 or better. This year, we had about 49%. So there has been an impact in the proficiency for biology. Now, English 2 is the one that's a little bit different from our math and our sciences. If you look, you can see that the scores are relatively similar
from last fall to this fall. And the proficiency is identical, with a comparable group of students testing. And I think Ms. Robinson can probably tell us why that is.
When you look at the English curriculum in and of itself, it is a spiraling curriculum that has similar standards from course to course, but with a deeper level of complexity as you move from course to course. So English 2 would not be unfamiliar in standards to sophomores going into the class. So we would expect that they had some prior knowledge to kind of hang their hat on before they ever came into the English 2 class. And so that's why we really, I believe we really don't see a significant difference in that particular course in the testing.
Being a former English teacher, I defer all English to her. So, but you can see that. All right, and then Math 3, again, you can see math is probably where you're going to see the biggest impact. And again, that mirrors what we see nationally in terms of what's happening with math scores during this period. You can see again, I look at it and it's the number of A's, it's those high achievers that seem to be the most impacted by our model that we're having. We do have an increase in the numbers of D's and F's. It's kind of like they all shifted down a grade, if you will. That appears to be the pattern. But you also see that in the proficiency, going from 66% proficient to 56% proficient. You see it? Okay. And then finally, we have Math 1. Again, you can see 142 students testing, so it's not a lot of students. When we expect at the end of the year, we'll have probably over 800 students. So those comparisons just don't work for Math 1. But you can see how our students performed in Math 1. I'll just as a frame of reference, many of the students that take Math 1 in the first semester are students that are repeating the course. They've already had it, they've struggled, and they're repeating the course for the second time. Okay.
I'll be sharing with you some data for our youngest learners in kindergarten through third grade. Both of these different assessments that I share with you are products of our Read to Achieve legislation, which does support students to be proficient in reading before they leave third grade. The first test is our BOG3, beginning of grade 3 reading test. It is a measure of reading comprehension, and very important to note is that it does measure end of third grade reading standards, but it's taken typically at the beginning of the year. In 2019, it was taken in early September. This year, 2020, it was actually administered in early December, so about 3 months difference in the administration due to COVID and the state's requirement that it happen on the 20th day of face-to-face instruction. Our participation rate was 86%, whereas in a typical year we would have had closer to 100% or right at 100% participation. What you'll see is a 3% increase in proficiency this year. It's just, again, important to keep in mind that it was administered in December, and also that our participation rate was just a bit lower than it typically is. But our celebration here is that it does show that our students are learning and progressing in reading. Our second assessment, as we move on to that slide, is an assessment called iReady. In comparison to the BOG3, this test is actually administered to kindergarten, first, second, and third grade students. It is a test of reading skills such as phonics and vocabulary that lead to proficient reading comprehension. This particular assessment is administered 3 times a year, September, January, and May, and we did stick with that timeline this year. It, again, is part of the Read to Achieve law. It's very important for third graders because it serves as a pathway, one of the ways that they can meet proficiency in reading as a third grader under the Read to Achieve law. It is very important to note that this particular test was administered remotely, both in September and January, because we were on a Plan C, whereas the beginning of grade 3 test was actually an in-person assessment. So we would question the validity and reliability of the results that we have. We have shared those with you anyway, and what it does show is the change in the percent of proficient students since September has actually increased. and every grade level. And so we can celebrate that, again, our students are learning in our lower grades. You will notice a marked difference in participation of kindergarten first and second grade students compared to third grade, because our dual language students in K through 2, their primary language is Spanish, and so they are not assessed on this English assessment. They're actually currently being assessed on a Spanish-based assessment.
We want to look at our grade distribution. This is the second measure that we have for looking at student performance. So we took all of the grades every student in Buncombe County earned for every class. So in our I would say, like in elementary, that may be 4 grades, it may be 5, maybe 6, depending on how the school is set up. In middle school, it is definitely every student counting for 6 classes. In high school, it would be 4 classes. So that kind of gives you reference to where the grades are coming from. So in grades 3 through 8, you can see the distribution of each letter grade that students earned. Again, as we expected, I think we've heard this in the news consistently, the students earning an F, the number of Fs is increased. But I would also, again, draw your attention to the A's and seeing what's happening at that end of the spectrum as well. So the conclusion that we're drawing is that, whatever the model we are in is impacting all of our students. But we are also aware that it's impacting some students more than others. We get that. So you can see there.
Do you have questions so far for any of these
part.
staff members?
I have a couple of questions. One is back to you, Mr. Earwood. You talked about the federal requirement for the EOCs is that we reach 95% participation. Is that true for the CTE test as well?
I believe it is. I hesitate because I'm not in the CTE world, but I believe they are held to that standard as well.
Yes. The fact that we only reached 94%, is that a concern?
To me, it's not. The fact that we reach 94% is an absolute positive. The window has not closed for testing. What they've done is they've extended the window through the spring.
I see.
So there's a good chance that we will still get that 95%.
Okay. And I also have a question for Ms. Reed. I've asked this question before, but just want to raise it again. The fact that beginning of the BOG tests were administered so late in the year kind of makes us look good in the beginning of the year, but my concern is it's going to make us look worse in the end of the year, because not only are we struggling with COVID, but also if our period of time from BOG tests to EOGs is shorter, is that also going to look like less growth than we would have had if we could have done the BOGs earlier?
I would imagine if statisticians get a hold of this information, they will account for that shorter time period.
Okay.
I'm not sure how they're going to use that data at the state level this year, however.
I don't think it's going to be comparable because some systems have not been in school at all to take that in-person test.
So for instance, the school systems, we have a school system in our county that has not been, they have not been in person at all. They wouldn't have even done BOGs at all?
That's correct. The state has opened that window for BOG until March. So school systems have until March to administer it. SAS is the company that operates EVOS. The only statement they said, we will look at the data and determine if we can even use it to measure growth. So it's not even decided that it'll be, they'll be able to measure growth.
Because it's going to be all over the place with the different school systems based on, okay.
Absolutely. We were talking with a school this morning. We have monthly check-ins with some of our schools who are reporting about iReady, for example. And what we saw on the iReady sample of test data showed that the scores were high because probably some support for the younger students, and the 4th grade scores were very much comparable to last year. So we're taking a lot of that information into account, but the comparability is not as we have expected in the past.
And I will offer, with the 95%, the state of North Carolina has submitted a waiver to waive the requirements of the 95%, to waive the consequences of not testing 95%. So that is something we probably wouldn't know anything about that until April.
I think the important thing to think about BOG, and as Ms. Ding is in the room as a third grade teacher, the teacher's using that data to inform their next steps in the classroom. And how do we enrich for that student who is excelling, and how do we further support and provide interventions for the student who is not at grade level? That's the key. It's not to hold anyone at a harmful status, but it's how do we help that student? And that's what our teachers have used this data for. So what's next?
So, can I ask a quick question? So, I want to make sure I understand this right. In 2020, spring, did we do EOCs?
No, everything was waived in the spring.
Okay, so that's what I thought. So really, you're going to have a full year. So regardless of where the school system goes for the rest of the school year and how attendance is, CB, whatever it is, you're not going to have a 2020 spring to compare it to.
Correct.
And you don't have something to compare it to that's different than the way you could look at fall semester this year versus fall semester last year. My question is, how can we measure, and can we measure, do you feel confident that we can take some type, I'm not talking about what the state tells us we have to do. Do you, as people who are administering for our kids in this system, feel like with any confidence you can measure growth? Because for me, that's what this is all about. If our kids are growing and we can measure it and touch it, even with these different things, then I have less heartburn. So can we do that?
So first of all, for me, growth is a very specific definition. I use the word progress. Our students are progressing. Great. Now, the question we're going to want to know, are they progressing at the rate we would expect them to, or compared to what we would normally expect? Growth is a comparison. Growth is comparing the progress of our students to the progress of all the students across the state. I honestly, for me, I'm not going to feel comfortable with how that's going to be measured, with students taking tests at different times of the year. Again, some students will not take their fall EOCs until the spring. How do you compare our students who took it when they finished the course with students who are taking it 3, 4, 5 months later? I mean, I don't know how you compare that.
I think we have to look individually at students and in small groups at the school level to watch the trajectory, what happened in 2019 with the last formal testing situation, where are we now, what's happened in between. All of our schools have at-risk or care team meetings, or some schools call them name and claim, and they watch monthly where students are moving towards or where they're not, and what do we need to do differently. So I think that anecdotal data will be very important.
Well, and I would hope and I don't know the answer to this, but I would hope we as a school system can figure out a way to gauge that progress and make sure we're doing the best we can for our kids, because the reality is you're not going to have anything. Let's just say the vaccines work and we go back to a regular school year in the fall of 21. You don't have anything there to compare it to. You got to go back 2 years. So you're going to be the 22-23 school year before you have back-to-back years. That's a long time based upon what the state standards are now for growth for us. And so I would just hope we, as a school system, I don't know if there's something the board can do to help with that so that gets the right kind of eyeball looking at it, I guess, if that makes sense.
The importance of the formative assessments in our content areas and our courses is key. And those are based on grade level standards that our teachers have made in conjunction with their peers and professional learning communities, including some of the work of our district curriculum specialists. So we have to know that we're progressing through those standards because we have to adjust and make sure that we're making up for the gaps, because we don't know from March of last year to now,
Exactly.
our kids didn't have any formal testing.
Right.
We tried to keep our standards high. We worked to make sure that we were aligning the work as best we could. But when the state said we have grace and forgiveness, many of our students heard that very loudly. And our teachers worked extremely hard last spring, but we know there are gaps, and our teachers are working harder now to fill those gaps. But absolutely, we hear you, and that's very important to us as well.
I have one other question. I loved what Mr. Thompson had to say about the data showing us things, but also making us wonder things. And when I look at this slide, having heard what he had to say about grades 5 through 8, I wonder what that middle slice would show us with the grades and whether that would correlate with engagement and attendance. And so if that's a graph you could send us maybe later on to show us, just grades 3, 4, and then maybe 5, 8, and then 9 through 13. So
We
that
are breaking it down in that very manner, and then looking at some of our special populations as well.
Yeah, I would love to
And we're
see that.
doing that to make sure that our next steps, are we really meeting with the students who are most vulnerable, who are not attending regularly, who are not completing those assigned tasks? Are we making sure that they're getting that extra support that you graciously provided our teachers on Wednesdays? So we've really honed in on that. Not just accepting, oh, that student didn't come when I invited them, but really making sure the families understand that we have to see progress. Not only do we have to see progress, we've got to make sure that we've filled in gaps. Teachers start thinking about retention and course failures at this time of year and having those conversations with families, because we certainly know the research and the impact of too many retentions on students and their futures and them dropping out of school. So we have to do everything we can right now to make sure that we are filling in those gaps, but we need families alongside of us. So that's the focus right now. Again, no parent should be surprised when they receive a report card of a student who is failing. We have to make sure that they're committed, and we can pass this semester or this school year if we do X, Y, and Z. One part that came up with the attendance that we have always had in previous years, we had students that we had to bring in and make up attendance. We haven't been able to do that this year, so that's another reason for a little bit more grace and flexibility. We have people making home visits, helping students on the front porch or standing outside in the driveway. We have credit recovery at all of our high schools to make sure that, again, we don't want to lose that credit and take you out of that 4-year graduation pathway. We have Twilight, which is an after-school credit recovery and tutoring that's happening right now. Mini-mester will happen in the summer. We see freshmen who are in high school, and freshmen tend to struggle a little bit at that transition, but they're so excited about being in high school, and it's a new way of schooling. And that hasn't happened this year, so we're trying to take that into account. All of our schools are reviewing their mid-year data. They're looking at their teachers' goals, their school improvement goals. Are we doing the right professional development? Do we have any needs that we can address, and how do we address those? What are the interventions? And then more importantly, what are we doing for our brightest students? How are we getting them back into that enrichment and getting them excited? And first and foremost, we know everyone has been impacted by a pandemic, so the social emotional learning. Are we using those CASEL practices that Mr. Thompson has talked about with how do we pull that engagement and get students actively interacting in their classroom, knowing that it is challenging to talk back and forth on Zoom, and sometimes students will start talking and then everyone else starts talking and then they don't talk. So correctly utilizing breakout rooms or private office hours and tutoring services through that. Right now, our plans are to look at any federal dollars that might come our way. We have not received figures of those yet, but we do have some smaller pots of money through the state, the governor's monies, and we're using that for some EC and ESL and vulnerable population summer school or summer programs. We hope to offer Read to Achieve summer reading camp as we've done in past years and had good success. And then we know that we're going to have to target some summer programming for those students, especially in the middle school level, as that's an area that we're worried about. So principals feel the intensity, teachers feel the intensity, we feel the intensity, and we're working very hard to help students move forward because we know this has been a challenging time period for everyone. If you have questions about your particular school, principals will be happy to share their data with you. They have this presentation, they have their levels of data as well, and we'll be happy to talk with you. If you have questions, please talk with your district principals, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
I just add one thing. If there is one common term or one common concept that we are going to hear beginning this summer, all the way through next year, it's the word in capital letters, recovery. That is the impact of COVID-19 from the standpoint of education. And it's not only academic recovery, it'll be social, emotional health recovery.
Absolutely.
Ms. Swanger, I have a question. Do you know if any of that additional funding will allow for some enrichment opportunities over the summer? So maybe not necessarily those that are academically struggling that would normally fit like with our Read to Achieve summer camps, but
We certainly hope.
offered, right, just maybe for that average student who, you know, might want a little extra to help get them, you know, back on track and successful.
We certainly hope. We did some of that enrichment last year virtually, but we certainly hope that we can do some of that again this year. And once we receive those dollars, we will have a chart of account that will tell us what expenditures we can use out of those codes. So we'll certainly look for that.
Right. For instance, I'm just thinking about like some of the little summer camps that are offered at the high schools, like science camps, that typically have a charge for parents, but perhaps some of that funding could be used like as a sliding scale for people to tap into for some financial assistance to do some of those extra programs that are fun but also learning at the same time.
Absolutely.
So, okay, thank you.
And I had a question. So you mentioned Twilight is happening right now. Is that happening remotely this year? And if so, how's that going? Like, are they doing that at home?
It is.
Because I've facilitated that before, and I can't imagine that. Is it going well?
Yes, from
Okay.
all accounts, absolutely. We have
Okay.
asked our teachers to keep documentation of what they're doing with students so that they'll have that complete picture of all that has been done to help students
Okay. Okay.
make those promotion decisions.
Will that
Our
be back
teachers
to
are masters.
face-to-face? Once we're back, typically that's happening in the school building still, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate this report. It's very enlightening, and our curriculum staff continues to make us proud, and I appreciate that, as do all board members. At this time, we're going to take a break. I've been told it's a 5-minute break, and it's 3:17, so do your math.
He's not, he hasn't said anything yet. She was talking about
We're starting Kim Fisher's presentation right now, and you guys are after her right after.
Okay.
We will continue with our meeting, and our next presenter is Kim Fisher with our Human Resource Department.
Hello,
Thank you.
good afternoon. Thank you. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time today to recap some of the special considerations that the board has provided to maintain a strong workforce and to say how much we appreciate the board's continued support of our staff. Just a few highlights for you. The special considerations: currently we have 45 classroom teachers out of 1,684 classroom teachers, so 2.7% working from home due to high risk for COVID for themselves or someone in their home. The board graciously extended the federal emergency sick leave on a voluntary basis. The law allowed us to do that through March 31st. That helps enable employees when they are placed in isolation or quarantine based to COVID-related events. BCS employees have the option to bring their school-aged children to work on virtual days and to attend school in person on both A and B days. We currently have an active substitute teachers, 488. BCS consistently filled 10% more absences in the fall of 2020 compared to the national average. We compared to over 6,000 other LEAs nationwide. Masks, including KN95s, are available to staff, and other required PPE is available at the school, and plexiglass is installed upon request. We have additional cleaning protocols that have been established for sanitizing and disinfecting main areas of occupancy, commonly touched surfaces, and for symptomatic cleaning as needed. Health and safety updates and other school news is posted frequently on the employee webpage. And all of you have seen our BCS employees' COVID protocols reviewed and approved by the Buncombe County Health and Human Services, posted on the employee BCS webpage, shared regularly. Highlight just a few of the flow charts. These flow charts are very instrumental and show good illustration of the types of decisions that we go through in conjunction with our communicable disease nurses, school nurses, and the district nurse supervisors to determine when to place an employee in isolation or quarantine. The first one is if an employee actually tests positive with symptoms or without symptoms. This one is an employee that is exhibiting symptoms. They get tested or they do not get tested. What to do if an employee has been in close contact with someone that is not in their home, not in the same household, and they have symptoms, they don't have symptoms, they get a test, or they don't get a test. And the last one is just showing household members that are symptomatic or positive, and they are a BCS student or employee in the home. April Bauer is with us. We want to just give a huge shout out of thanks to April Bauer, our school nurse manager, and she has some of the district nurses with us. They have been so instrumental in helping us through all of the COVID changes and updates and just keeping us current and compliant when we isolate and place employees on quarantine and students. So April, I have pulled up your slide. Can you hear us, April Bauer?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yep, so just wanted to kind of start with an overview of the screening process at schools, and this is sort of in line with the slides that were just up with the algorithms for school staff. So you guys are probably familiar by now, that anyone entering a North Carolina public school is required to be screened. So this is the updated algorithm that we use for that, and that's based on the Strong Schools Toolkit. So you can see where, there are multiple sort of checkpoints. There are specific questions that are asked about symptoms, about whether they've tested positive or had an exposure, and they have to also pass a temperature screening in order to come in the building. And all of the guidance, I should say, for this and the Strong Schools sort of guidance documents in their entirety are on the North Carolina DHHS website, and those are publicly available. Any questions about screening? No? Okay. Next, we're going to talk about what happens when there is a positive case, and Julie Berger is going to take that one.
Right. We have the unique opportunity as school nurses that we work alongside Buncombe County Health Department with case investigation, and that gives the school system a leg up. And so we are able to do contact tracing and case investigation in real time. So within the school system, the school nurses serve as case investigators. They identify positive cases and their close contacts. And the system helps to quickly notify anyone involved in a possible exposure and to ensure each person's right to privacy. We serve as case investigators with HHS, as I said before, and they contact persons with lab-confirmed COVID-19 cases, and we call them positive cases, to conduct a case investigation and work with the positive case to identify all close contacts and let the school know who those contacts might be. And that way we can identify in real time if we had anybody in the school that was a close contact, and they can quickly, get guidance on how to get testing and be on quarantine.
All right, next slide. Thanks, Julie. So next is just a brief kind of overview of transmission and safety measures. There's been a lot of talk recently, some new studies that have come out, some pretty good data looking at rates of transmission within the school setting, which really are low, even in areas with higher rates of community spread. So, the science around COVID-19 is always being updated and, so always evolving. But so far, the data that we have to date really does not point to schools being a driver of community transmission of COVID-19. The dashboard is where we do report those school-related positive cases for those who are on campus. One kind of data point that might be of interest is for classroom teachers in Buncombe County schools. Going back to August, there have been a total of 86 positive cases reported out of all of our Buncombe County schools classroom teachers. And then, the other piece that goes hand in hand with transmission and safety is, of course, the 3 W's. Being in public health, we cannot present without reminding everybody how important those are. We know that the places where we're seeing that low school transmission, it really is in conjunction with those strong preventive measures. So we know that each of the 3 W's work well individually, but they work even better when they're used all together. So, wearing the masks, maintaining that 6 feet of distancing and washing hands is really important in the schools, and it's also really important for everyone to be doing out in the community so that we can keep our school buildings safe. Next slide. And our next slide will be Angie Wilson. Angie, you are on mute.
Thank you. So when the students and staff return to school, one of the things that we're going to start doing is what is called rapid antigen COVID-19 testing. Now, this is going to be just for students and for staff members. It is students or staff who become symptomatic while they are actually in the building and on campus. It is not a screening tool to be used as such, or to be used for random testing either. So if someone becomes symptomatic while at school, they can become tested. And if they are positive, what we will do is immediately give them recommendations. They will get their case investigation and some contact tracing that'll be done in real time to help decrease risks of transmission. If they're negative, they will also be given guidance for follow-up testing, PCR tests, etc. If they need information on where to go for testing, we will also give them the buncombeready.org website to reference them. At this time, we're currently working on plans to increase our capacity for testing, and that will be related to when a school nurse is not actually on site to a particular school.
Thank you, Angie. One thing just to add about the testing is that we are really excited about being able to offer that. It's part of a pilot program through North Carolina DHHS, and we've been working closely with our local BC HHS to get everything in place. And we think it'll be a really big benefit for families that do have barriers to access to healthcare so that we can do that testing on site. Okay. Next slide, and our next slide will be Tamara Garland.
Good afternoon. So I just wanted to mention the COVID-19 vaccination program. Currently here in Buncombe County, we are in the process of vaccinating both group 1 and 2, which is our healthcare workers as well as long-term care facilities staff and residents. As well as older adults, and that's the 65 and older. Our next step is going to be those frontline essential workers, but North Carolina is working to work in step in that all counties will proceed with the next group at the same time. Yes, there have been some issues with that, but they are working to try to ensure that we are all moving in the same direction. And you can actually go on the Buncombe County website and it gives you the information on where we are in regards to the vaccine dashboard. It'll tell you where we're at in North Carolina, how many folks are on the wait list, and what that would look like.
Okay, thank you, Tamara. That is all of our slides. So I guess at this point we are open to questions that you guys might have.
I have a question. Can you understand me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I have a question about vaccinations, a couple of questions actually. First of all, so I understand that teachers will be in group 3, the frontline essential workers. Do you have any idea of when we might be as a state moving from group 2 to group 3?
So as of 3:40 p.m. today, I have not heard a definite timeline on that. I don't think that one has been provided. That guidance is coming from North Carolina DHHS, and I think a lot of it really does depend on what the allotment is of vaccines, week over week. They did just recently make changes to the distribution plan so that counties now have a 3-week window where they know what their doses are going to be in terms of volume, but they're still working, I think, to increase that supply because it definitely is right now still a supply versus demand issue.
The second part of my question is, as you know, the governor has come out very strongly encouraging schools to reopen and bring our students back into the schools. How much flexibility is there once we get to group 3? How much flexibility is there at the county level in order to prioritize those teachers that the governor is asking be working back in the school building?
Yep, that is a great question. It is true there has been a lot of conversation about the importance of returning to learning in school in person. There was also some information that came out from the CDC talking about how we can do that safely even without vaccinating school staff, although we all want our school staff to be vaccinated as soon as possible. My understanding is that as of right now, the intent of North Carolina DHHS is not for counties to create subgroups within group 3. But everything is subject to change, and that guidance I think would come from the state and then through our local health department here in Buncombe County if we were going to be able to do something like prioritize one particular group within the larger group 3 population. And I know that's not a great answer, but we don't have all of them yet.
Thank you.
And so then I have a question then. You had mentioned that the CDC had stated that we do have the ability to open up schools to in-person learning regardless of whether or not our staff is vaccinated while following other safety protocols. So again, that brings me to our 3 W's. And one of those that I think we as a school system will have difficulty following if we go into Plan A would be the 6-foot spacing. And again, according to the Safe School Toolkit, in Plan A, that is not a requirement, but I think what we hear continually, though, from the health department is that regardless of what the toolkit states, if we are not able to answer truthfully that we were more than 6 feet apart for that length of time, we will have to be considered an exposure and follow the quarantining protocols.
Yes, absolutely. So the CDC guidelines for determining a close contact have not changed. We are following those. So like you said, anyone who is less than 6 feet away from that positive case for that cumulative 15 minutes or more is a close contact. So that is definitely a piece to consider if you're looking at Plan A and distancing of 6 feet cannot be maintained. That would essentially mean that, you know, anytime you had a positive case in a classroom, the classroom would have to be quarantined as a close contact to that person.
And how much notice would you be able to give before that quarantine process started?
Well, if we had, you know, a case that was identified during the course of the school day, so if we were talking about someone who developed symptoms and we used one of our rapid tests, then we would be contacting parents and guardians, you know, pretty much immediately to let them know that their student has been identified as a close contact and does need to go ahead and begin quarantine. So I would say, depending on where the test is happening and how soon we're notified, you know, as soon as we know, that is when we do notify parents and guardians and ask them to go ahead and act quickly so that the children can go into quarantine and reduce the potential for transmission in the school building.
And can you tell us again, what is that length of quarantine time?
Yes, so that is actually variable now at this point. We were operating under sort of a standard 14-day quarantine, and then the CDC updated guidance to allow for quarantine to end at either 7 days if someone remains symptom-free and they test negative on or after day 5, or at 10 days if they do not test but are symptom-free. Best practice is still 14 days, and if you do end quarantine before 14 days, it is part of the CDC guidance that you continue to maintain the distancing and that you monitor for symptoms. So if we did bring students back prior to 14 days, the distancing would be a piece of that process.
Thank you. And before I let you go, I just want to give a shout out to y'all that are on the screen, because as far as I'm concerned, every one of y'all truly are superheroes. I know how hard it is just to be a nurse, but to be a school nurse in the middle of a pandemic, trying to help us determine where to go next. Y'all really rock, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
That message is from the entire board. The ability for our school system to work cooperatively with the nursing staff here is an example for the rest of the state. Yes. And we truly appreciate what you're doing. All right, Ms. Fisher, you're finished. Well, we thank you very much, and we appreciate the information that our nurses have provided to us, and as I say, their continued support in our program.
Madam Chair, I had one question for Ms. Fisher.
Yes.
If I could ask it. I don't know where she went. She's still here? And you can probably answer this quickly. The bullet point, substitute teachers currently active 488. How does that number compare pre-pandemic?
One more time, how does the number compare to?
Substitute teachers currently active 488. That's in a pandemic. How does that number compare to years in the past where there was no pandemic?
So we historically do have higher fill rates. And we have maintained those. So that is historically where we would trend, and we've maintained that during the pandemic.
No, not the fill rates, the number of currently active substitute teachers we have is 488, what I'm reading. Is that about what we always have, or do we have normally 650, or
Sorry.
where are we normally?
No, that is lower. That's a lower number than we normally have. It's lower by about 300. But we are still feeling our fill rates. So, but the actual number is a lower number.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions from the board? All right, hearing none, I'm going to declare another break. This one is also 5 minutes, is that correct? According to my phone, it is 3:48, and again, do the math. Thank you.
I couldn't hear you. I have a terrible time hearing.
I'll repeat it again. It's all.
Yes.
Be kind of the same though, because we share a hospital. I mean, I guess they have RD and.
All right, we're going to continue our work session, and we are now going to begin a discussion that's going to be led by Dr. Baldwin. We appreciate that, on metrics. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our board has expressed interest in expanding a discussion and conversation regarding the use of local COVID data and data points and data patterns, and connecting those, aligning them with our decision-making process concerning reopening schools at various times when needed. So with that, we've provided our board with 4, I'm going to call them options, and I would divide those options into sort of 2 camps. One is an identification of the components and data components that would be used in reaching those reopening decisions. The second camp is actually identifying specific numbers, or in the case of our state COVID-19 map for counties, actually aligning that decision with some aspect of a specific color. So one more general in terms, informative, but yet general. The other much more specific in terms of numbers and colors. So with that, Madam Chair, I think I'll turn it back to you to open this discussion, and certainly our district leadership team is available to be included in that discussion as the board sees fit.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Baldwin. At this time, is there a board member that wants to begin the discussion? Silence is golden.
Just for a little while, though. I would like to first start off by saying thank you for putting these options together. I do think it is something that is worth looking into, however we proceed. I feel like any time that we can shine a light on how we come to our decision-making process, that's always a good thing for the public. For me, I reviewed these, and the one that I found to be the most desirable to me was number 4, with just a couple of tweaks. I liked that it used several points of local data to determine our plans, as well as including the positivity rates and where we fell on the North Carolina County Alert System map. And the fact that we would review these data points and metrics within a 2-week period before making any type of determination. Also liked the idea that, again, this is not hard and fast. It's more of guidance. But it does, I believe, give the community a snapshot of what it is that we're looking at when we try to get to the desired goal, which is in-person learning. And I think that it will hopefully give the community the opportunity to look to see what they individually can do to help maintain our numbers so that, favorably, so that we can continue to do in-person learning and progress into full-time, Plan A, as many have desired. And I guess with that, I'll point out that one of the things that I had wanted to look at a little differently was the decision to go into Plan C, that we looked at the benchmark being a positivity rate of 8% or higher, or instead of and, red on the North Carolina County Alert System map. The reason that I'm thinking that is that allows us the the opportunity to look at where we've been historically and recognize the opportunity to pump the brakes as needed if we need to make some decisions for the safety of our schools and our community. And then as well, the Plan A positivity rate to be 5% or lower, and to remove orange and have that read 5% or lower and yellow on the county alert system map. To me, this is the best case scenario, especially while we are waiting to get our staff vaccinated. I personally would feel more comfortable with looking at options that show us favorably in yellow.
That's a lot said, Ms. Churchill.
It is. I figured I'd get it all in real quick.
I'd also like to add that if we move this direction in terms of being more transparent, I feel like there should be some mention of the governor and state level restrictions that also guide our decision making and that limit us in terms of what we can and can't do. And I feel like that should be included here somewhere.
I did have one question, Amy,
Yes.
for you. So if that Plan A, and I'm just thinking forward, not saying right now, but if we change that, we took off orange, then in theory we would be looking at, up to 25 days, because there's a 2-week lapse on that map changing, and then we would also be saying we wouldn't make that decision that week. We would wait till not that coming Monday, the following Monday. So it just seems like a long time. Does that make sense?
It does. I actually, thought about that because when I first read this, I thought that the 2 weeks seemed a little lengthy. But then I kind of decided, if we're seeing, big changes either negatively or favorably, these are just conversation points and some guidance, so it's not written in stone. We could always make the decision to go ahead and call a special meeting to make decisions quicker than that.
But we have to remember that we have to give our administration and our teachers.
Yes.
They can't turn around on a dime.
Right.
And so when you talk about going from B, possibly, A day, B day, to putting all those children in school, you're talking about, we all have heard this. You're talking about bus transportation, you're talking about food distribution, you're talking about me as a teacher. Amanda, you know this. That's taxing in and of itself to figure out how to configure my classroom as well as change my lesson plans and get it all in place. From a teacher's or an administrator's perspective, it's very different than from a healthcare or a person on the street's perspective.
Well, I think that that's actually what was part of my decision to feel like, that 14 days wasn't all that long, and adding those additional, 5 to 7 days, whatever that additional week is that administration has asked for, making any kind of transition. Yeah. So, theoretically, then you're talking about 21 days, and I think for the most part, that's a pretty good target. I think what Amanda is just saying, for me, for instance, my what if was, well, what if, we're in Plan B and we just, we start seeing trends that are, looking, our percent positives are climbing, and similar to where we were, that week before Christmas, if we needed to call an emergency meeting to move into Plan C, I would like the option to be able to do that without having to wait the 14 days to do that.
Right.
So again, these are more just, when we're just generally talking about, hey, where do we go from here, using these options as our guiding principles, not saying that we have to stand by them 100%, but I think it just, again, puts something in writing that people can look at and follow along and understand a little better that, what we do behind the scenes anyway.
And the one thing that I had asked for in our meeting, which I'm not seeing, I do think that there should be some sort of verbiage in there that does share with parents what that expectation would be as far as when that transition would happen. Because if we do get, we are 5% or lower and we do turn yellow, I just want to make sure that it's clear and everyone knows that doesn't mean that next day we're in plan A. And I really think that there should be something drafted in here that talks about, 2 Mondays from or something. I don't know the best way to state that, but I think that's what teachers and staff would be looking for, Dr. Baldwin. Isn't that kind of what was?
I think that sort of piggybacks on Ms. Franklin's statement, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think any transition from one plan to the other, again, now this is all relative, but if the time allows, then in a transition, certainly giving an adequate amount of planning time for schools, administrators, staff is absolutely crucial. And it's also important to give time for parents in the community to adjust to what the transition of the schedule, whether it be moving from more flexible to maybe moving from restrictive to more flexible, or vice versa. There could be significant childcare issues that come into play. So I think you're exactly right. And some of that is in honesty, some of the concern I have with being specific with our numbers comes to your point. If we do that, that's the decision of the board. We've got to work hard on the communication piece. That's absolutely crucial, because these are simply benchmarks. As Ms. Franklin said, this board has the power to call a special called meeting and essentially make a decision in line with where the state and the governor has gone with that statewide decision at any time.
Yeah, I understand that. I think that putting something in place with metrics is great, and I think we have a really great starting point here. And I think the thing that's lacking is I think we do need to be upfront in our communication with what that transition timeline looks like. And I don't think it just needs to be up in the air, because then again, we have, people wanting it way shorter and people wanting it way longer. And if we say what it's going to be on the front end, then that argument fails to exist anymore.
And I've actually I have a motion that has been typed up with the changes, and also included in those changes does address that transition time period, because again, what we've been hearing loud and clear is exactly what everybody is saying. It was not included in this draft, and so my motion is also very much a rough draft, because we are going to have these conversations. And so what even you may have in your folder for our next, session, we don't have it right now. It's going to be given to you in our closed session. But they, that might even be tweaked some after our conversation. This is just the opportunity as a board for us to have these discussions that we've, kind of started off and on over the last couple of work sessions. Just gives us an opportunity to sort of ask questions like you are doing. But most definitely, I fully understand that we need to, at the very minimum, I believe, give, a week's notice before making changes, if at all possible.
Do you have copies of that motion, and would
Yeah,
it
I
be
mean, we
appropriate
have
to
like
share
over
them
an
at this
hour
point?
left right now.
They actually, since we couldn't vote on it in a work session, they're actually in your next packet.
So we can't even
I can go get them.
look at them. Is there any reason we should not do that?
I'll go get them. So, Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Please.
Well, I want to wait because part of this question goes to our board attorney who just left the room, so I'll hold off until he comes back.
Okay.
We'll say this because I don't need him for this part. I don't understand how the highlighted part matches up with the top half. So the top half tells me that we're going to look at diagnostic test positivity rate, new positive cases per 100,000% change, number of school clusters, North Carolina County Alert System. And then the highlighted part narrows everything down to two things for us to make a decision on to change. And those things don't match to me. I'm perfectly comfortable with the top half. I'm not comfortable at all with tying our hands with specific numbers, especially taking the and out and making it an or, because if you're at 7.9% or orange, what are we?
The Plan B, like the middle didn't change to an or.
That is
just
correct.
that top line and just only the top line.
I thought you said it for all three.
No, just for the Plan A, going into Plan A, removing orange.
Plan C, right?
You're Plan A.
Plan C,
Plan
going
C.
for red, but as far as removing orange, it would be removing orange off of Plan A. So maybe it's a good idea that she's getting the motion that I was looking at, presenting. But again, these are, to me, these are not two separate things, Pat. It's just, I guess it's a subgroup. The highlighted is a subgroup of what we have listed on, and E, North Carolina County Alert System color, based on combined metrics. So then, we're not disregarding all of the stuff up top. I'm just breaking it down a little bit further to say, when we're looking at, the county alert system, this is, ideally the ranges that we would be looking at, but not saying that after all of what is in that first paragraph, we're going to ignore and only look at those two data points, because if that was the case, we would have gone with my original thoughts early on in all of this discussion of just using those two.
Well, if we had gone with these numbers, we would have spent, I'd have to go back and look, but there's a good bit of first semester that we wouldn't have been in Plan B.
And
We would have been in Plan C for several weeks from that Thanksgiving to Christmas break.
No, actually, I think we would have had more time in Plan B.
Yeah.
Because Plan B.
We're in Plan B through the end of the semester.
That is correct.
We didn't go to
And-
Plan C till January. And we
Ultimately,
were well over 10% at that point.
ultimately, the way this is written, it's not even saying that it's going to automatically trigger a change. It's saying that these are the metrics that are going to trigger the special called meeting.
Discussion.
Where at that point, we would make a decision.
I doubt that that's the way the public's going to read it.
I agree with you, Pat, that it's a little confusing, and I feel like there are probably ways we can clarify it. So when I look at the top half, A, B, C, and E all go together. The county alert system color includes the positivity rate, and it includes the new cases per 100,000. It doesn't list the percent change in the new positive cases, but that could be calculated. The only thing that's different there from what's below really is the number of school clusters. So there may be a way to make these two parts of it, thank you, agree with each other in a way that feels a little bit less confusing. Because I agree that as a member of the public, reading this, I would wonder, so what are you using to determine the plan? Is it this A, B, C, D, and E, or is it this thing down below? And if there's a way for us to make them be more in agreement with each other, I think it would be less confusing.
I would just interject, it's, when I talked about two camps, I think number 4 represents those. From the way I read this, I believe that first paragraph that Pat refers is a standalone. I say standalone, the two paragraphs, actually the three, let me say the 3 sentences below what's highlighted, that would be in accordance with either the highlight or the initial paragraph, first paragraph. But it's standalone. But again, it's more of a general information. These are the components, and to be honest with you, all of these components listed in that first paragraph, you've considered in your decisions. The diagnostic test positivity rate, that's certainly been considered. New positive cases per 100,000 population, again, off the county dashboard. Percent change in new positive cases per 100,000. Number of school clusters, that's all been a discussion at each point prior to your decisions. And then the North Carolina County Alert System color. And once that was developed, that's also been a part of your decision. So that first paragraph, in my opinion, is a standalone. It simply states that these are the components that this board is using to consider the decision of reopening at any phase. When you get into the highlighted part, as it says below, that highlighted section is an option to be included to provide more specificity. So essentially, the decision of the board needs to be, is it simply stating for the public, these are the components that we are considering as we make these decisions. These are the COVID-related data on a local basis we consider. Or do we want to identify more specificity in any one or more of those components to use for decisions? I see two separate camps. I think 4 includes both of them. Mr. Shatley, would you agree on that? I know our attorneys were involved in working with number 4 as well.
No, I mean, I agree. I think regardless of whether or not you all adopt 1, 2, 3, or 4, I think 4 is going to provide you both those avenues of consideration as well as potentially the most flexibility as well. So, but again, I mean, you all are going to have to choose whether or not to implement either of these. And I further agree with Dr. Baldwin and I think Ms. Simpkin that communication is going to be key on how we are able to do this, as well as what Ms. Churchill indicated that the positivity rates are guidelines, they're benchmarks. That should not necessarily control your specific decision, but they are something that you will absolutely consider when making your decisions, under number 4 anyway. And that was my question, was what I was going to ask you when you left to go get what you went to get. Help me to understand as benchmarks only what that means, because I think we've done, through no fault of our own, I think we've done a lot as a board to confuse the public because COVID-19 is confusing and the changes we've had to make. It's not anybody's fault, it's just the nature of what we've dealt with. But I just see if you start putting specific numbers out there, but I want to understand as benchmarks only, what does that mean? And I think you began to touch on that a little bit, but where am I locking myself in or not locking myself in if none of this verbiage was changed, just as I'm reading it now? Certainly, Mr. Bryant. So the way I read the highlighted part under section 4, which starts as benchmarks only, the way I read this is to state that if we hit one of these benchmarks in regards to positivity rate and our color code on the county map, on the county warning map that's put out by the state, that means you are going to meet. That means you all are going to. We are going to meet.
Mm-hmm.
You are going to meet and consider a change. A change. It doesn't mean you will change, because it also says you are going to consider all other relevant factors, which could certainly be advice and counsel from the local health department, from the state health department, from the CDC as well. But again, the way I read this, that for instance, if right now I believe our positivity rate is below 8%.
It is.
6.1, what they gave us on Monday. Yep. But let's assume a hypothetical that at the end of February we spike and we go over 10 or 11. You will meet, and you will consider whether or not to move back. Assuming you're in a plan B or plan A at that time, you would consider moving back to plan C, but there would be nothing that would require you to move back into plan C.
And we wouldn't meet based upon those numbers changing after 1 week.
It's after
we
a
would meet
14-day
after
pattern.
a 14-day
correct
evaluation of that.
Now again, that doesn't mean you couldn't meet prior to 14 days. I mean, the board is always welcome to meet at any time the chair calls a meeting or a certain number of members want to call a meeting. So you can always meet, but this is just a way of saying that if there is a improvement in our numbers, or there is a worst case scenario number in our days over a 14-day pattern or 14-day benchmark, we are going to come back and meet and discuss that and how that affects whether or not we should move in either direction.
And I'll just add this. Yeah, I've actually had the opportunity to talk to a lot of very unhappy parents the last couple of weeks. And when I'm talking to them about how we came to the decision to go into Plan C after the holidays, I reference this information, and when I have the opportunity, I email them the maps historically. This is where we were. This is, what plan we were in. This is where we are now. And in addition to the graph that we had that shows, that steady climb that we saw between Thanksgiving and Christmas and right after Christmas of those high percents. And when they could see that and actually, see what those numbers looked like, our decisions made a little more sense to them. That it wasn't just the board deciding to just meet and make the decision. That, we had data. And again, this isn't anything different than what we're already doing. It's just allowing the public to follow along with us. And I will still go on to say that, it just might give those families pause to think about the choices that they make that, can make those transitions between where we are in the county when they are deciding, to have those family gatherings versus maybe trying to be, a little safer and following the suggestions from our governor still and from the scientists, the CDC. Everybody is still saying, practice those 3 W's. And so, hopefully they can think back to where they were in Plan C and how we got there and follow along to see where we're at and just help to make some, good choices as families so that, they can help us out and we can help them out by having their kids back into in-person instruction.
And to Mrs. Simpkins' point regarding the decision being made by the board and a reasonable time period before the decision is enacted. That essentially would be made at this special called meeting if the decision was to transition to a new plan. Is that not correct?
I think that is correct, Dr. Baldwin. And I mean, what I would suggest is, because it may certainly depend on which way you're moving.
Right.
It's a little easier, I don't want to say easier, it might be logistically easier to move to a more restrictive plan than it is to move to a less restrictive plan for the reasons you all have already stated. For instance, if you move from Plan B to Plan A, there are some significant transportation issues to be considered. So, I mean, and I certainly understand, putting a timeline in here so you can be very transparent with the public, and I have no objection to that, but I mean, I think it's important for the board and for the board to get input from the administration on exactly what will that require. Will moving from C to B require 5 school days, or 10 school days, or B to A require 5 or 10 school days or more? Will moving from B to C require 2 school days? And so I do think it's important for the board to understand from administration what that will exactly mean. And so we could add something that is specific, but we could also add something that is more general in number 4, if the board is interested in adopting number 4, that just simply says the superintendent will recommend a transition plan at the meeting, and the board will consider it. Something to that effect. I mean, it's certainly up to you all, but I would make sure you had sufficient input in order to know exactly what the administration might need at that particular moment. And certainly I know Dr. Baldwin and his staff have contingency plans in place to do these. We went from everybody going to school in March to nobody going to school, or nobody attending physically school last March, pretty much at the drop of a hat. But it still was rather chaotic. So certainly keep that in mind. But we can be specific or we can be general. But I do think, I agree with Ms. Simpkins that it's important that we address it somehow or another in here. And I think, I would just like to add that I think we need to acknowledge that going to a more restrictive plan, so if we go from B to C, it's somewhat easier on the school side, but it's more complicated on the family side. Certainly. And so we will need transition time, whether we're becoming more restrictive or less restrictive, because either way, somebody's going to be significantly impacted.
Exactly right.
Or all of us will be significantly impacted.
Exactly.
And again, I had addressed that in my motion, and I actually like Mr. Shatley's recommendations of perhaps not using an actual 5 school day transition period, or maybe we could even say minimum of 5 day. I included a 5 school day transition period based off of what I had heard that administration wanted a week's turnaround time. But I think that there's value to that language. You give me a little heartburn with the 2-day turnaround time, but maybe that would be a little easier to handle if we're not putting those actual days in, but just knowing that we will, and again, going back to communication, whatever we decide, it would have to be decided on at a meeting and give people notice, one way or the other. So again, I don't think it's anything, like Dr. Baldwin pointed out, I don't think, this isn't really anything different, so to speak. It's just that it's putting it out there for other people to follow along and understand how we're coming to the conclusions that we're coming to. The guidelines, benchmarks, please help us make this work by doing your part in the community.
Well, we've asked the community consistently at every meeting throughout this to help us. I don't think putting these numbers out there is going to make any difference in how the community does or doesn't help us. There are folks that are going to help us, and there are some that just are not. I'm hopeful that more people will help us, But I know that, well, we've discussed these numbers ad nauseum with the health department, we've heard of numbers from the governor's office, we've discussed them ourselves. I just think we're trusted to make decisions, and it is important for us to share some numbers. I just don't know how we came to these numbers. I don't know, sitting here today with all the meetings I've been in, that 5% is the right number for Plan A. I don't know that. I don't know that 5.3% is not a better number. I don't know that 4.5% is not a better number. I don't know that. And my fear is, even no matter how much we say, well, we're going to come back and meet if it's 14 days, and the average guy on the street corner, we're going to confuse. I mean, the average guy who's struggling to make ends meet and keep his family together and to do what he can for his kids in school, we're going to confuse a lot of people in my mind doing this. And I just think that's a mistake on our part if we go down that line. I can be totally involved with the top half. But once we start putting numbers, and I understand, I've had a lot of heartburn with a lot of things related to COVID, especially recently. And I think I've been, for X number of years, as an advocate for transparency as I can be, for our kids and our families, our faculty, staff, and our school system. But I just don't know, sitting here right now, that those numbers are the right numbers. And for that reason, it would be difficult for me to support that part of this together. Having said that, not seeing what your motion is going to be later. I'm just looking at what I'm looking at here.
Mr. Bryan, I'm looking at the CDC website, CDC indicators and thresholds for risk of introduction and transmission of COVID-19 in schools, and they have a really nice chart with numbers. And the numbers that I'm seeing here agree with this CDC chart about transmission specifically in schools.
But the CDC and our governor all have recommended that we should be in Plan A with our K through 5 kids, and they're not attaching any numbers to that. They're not saying 5% positivity rate or 3% positivity rate or 7% positivity rate. What they've said to us is the data shows that Plan A, and that's probably the one of these three that I'm having the most problem with.
They're saying if safety protocols are in place.
Right.
And certain things are happening within the community.
Exactly, and I think we've proven at Buncombe County Schools we have those safety protocols in place.
Well, except for the distance.
But the 6-foot distancing has been taken out of the toolkit language.
Well, it has, but we just heard again from our health department that they'll be considering them as an exposure. And
as I would imagine every school system in the state is, or every health department in the state.
Yes.
That's not unique to us. And there are systems that recently, and for further back than recently, have been able to make that work. I hear the pleasure of the board. I understand the pleasure of the board and where they're going to go. I have problems with it.
You know, WLOS interviewed this lady yesterday, I guess it was, or day before. She was a parent of a student from Asheville High. And they had they panned in on her, and then they panned in on her son, who was an athlete and had not been able to attend class in person at Asheville High for a long period of time. And so she said, and I thought this was really good, she said, you know, in my bubble, this is what I need. And she enumerated what she needed. But then she said, all these other people here have their bubble and what they need. And so for us, Buncombe County Schools, our bubble is Buncombe County Schools, and how do we create this so that we can address multiple bubbles? And that's my profound picture. I'm sorry. I'm not blowing bubbles out of a bottle, let me tell you. So, that being said, I'm going to call this discussion over, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn this work session so we can move to the next piece of our agenda.
4:40.
Okay, could I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Could I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Do I have to call the roll?
Not on this one.
This one. Thank you very much. We are now adjourned. Any objection?
No.
We're now adjourned.